Well, I think we should do we can have people practice using the chat box. So we have a question. We want people to guess if you have ever been to our farm, Natural Bridges Farm, on the west side of Santa Cruz. How many species of birds do you think have ever been identified there by the eBird list? And Jonathan is disqualified from this one.
And also, you're really just hurting yourself if you go to eBird and look up the answer. So you have to legitimately guess.
Oh my gosh.
We're getting some chat answers. Oh.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, somebody had a pretty good guess.
Oops. Yeah, there's a lot of really good guesses.
All right, good. We had a stool joke. No evening is complete without them. Derry, I think we should probably get going, don't you think?
I think I could too. And the answer is 156.
So Malcolm Ricci had a great guess with 162, tied with somebody, I didn't get her name, who had 150. Did anyone get closer than that? Well, anyway, thanks for coming tonight. I give you to Derry.
Well, welcome to Bird Friendly Farms and Farm Friendly Birds, a conversation with Jonathan Franzen and Ann Baumgartner. My name is Derry Ganshorn, and I'm going to give a brief introduction about the Homeless Garden Project, our work, and some upcoming events, and then Jonathan and Joanne will take it away. Before, I think everyone already realizes that you're muted, but if you have a question for Jonathan or Joanne, please enter it into the chat box and then we'll answer questions in the last few minutes. So the Homeless Garden Project provides job training, transitional employment, and support services to people experiencing homelessness. We operate a community education and volunteer program that serves 2,500 people each year. And all of our programs take place in our 3.5 acre organic farm, Natural Bridges Farm, on the west side of Santa Cruz, and in related enterprises. In recent years, 100% of our graduates have gotten jobs, and the majority have gotten housing. Our mission is, in the soil of our urban farm and garden, people find the tools they need to build a home in the world. One of our core values most closely aligned with today's conversation is we value the well-being created by vibrant, natural, and social ecosystems. We're farming right now on temporary land. We've been there since 1995. It's loaned by Ron Swenson. And in a public-private partnership with the city of Santa Cruz, we are working to develop a permanent site, Pogonit Farm. We've raised $3.5 million for that project, and we're awaiting approvals to begin construction. This year, we've operated all of our programs, but due to the pandemic, some of our activities have been adapted or reduced. We're really proud to still be serving our community, operating our farm, and keeping our trainees employed, learning, and growing. We have created an event series called Sustain in Place, a series of at-home tastings to engage the community and sustain our work. And over the years, we've learned that the best way to understand our work is to experience the power of being on the farm, how it brings people together, it cultivates hope, gratitude, and community, and how it brings out the best in all of us. So our first event in this series is this Saturday, October 24th. And you can come to the farm to harvest your own greens, get a gift bag with wine and other goodies, and then tune in for the premiere of our keynote speaker, Deborah Madison. If you'd like to learn more about our work or our event series, about volunteering on the farm or in the store, please visit our website, homelessgardenproject.org. You can also keep in touch by signing up for our mail list or following us on Instagram and Facebook. So I am really grateful to our speakers today. I'm going to introduce them. Jonathan Franzen is a National Book Award winning author, as well as the winner of several conservation awards. He's a local Santa Cruzan and a CSA member at the Homeless Garden Project. He's been known to watch birds at our farm. In 2019, he delivered a keynote talk at our Sustained Supper, which was later published in the New Yorker, and ultimately helped us finish our fundraising campaign. His essay, Why Birds Matter, inaugurated the National Geographic magazine's Year of the Bird. Ann Baumgartner is the executive director of the Wild Farm Alliance, whose mission is to promote agriculture that helps to protect and restore wild nature. Joanne and her husband, Sam Earnshaw, were honored by the Ecological Farming Association with the Stewards of Sustainable Agriculture, SUSTI Award. Joanne participated in our food, farming, and culture book readings several years ago, reading her essay, How Biodiversity is Critical to a Fully Functioning Farm. So with that, I pass it on to Joanne. Thank you both.
I thought Jonathan was still
Yeah.
Oh, I said the wrong thing, yes.
Yes.
Yes, now I'll turn it over to Jonathan.
Joanne is really the featured speaker tonight. She has a real presentation, which I personally am really looking forward to seeing. So I'm going to keep my remarks brief. Joanne is going to be talking about what birds can do for farms. I want to talk a little bit about what farms can do for birds. When Derry and I first started talking about this, I told the story of living for a while in Berlin. This was after the wall came down, and spending quite a bit of time in the countryside to the east of Berlin toward Poland. And if you drive out that way, you see these pockets where things were still, you would see these pockets where things were still sort of East German. That is, under the communist regime, many things fell into ruin. They were not very efficient. Kind of nice areas. And in fact, some of the most important conservation work in Germany is being done on these parcels of land that the communists didn't get around to destroying. But much of it had already been converted to European Union conforming common agricultural policy type agriculture, which meant you would just see like a square mile of yellow, which was rapeseed, which was grown as a biofuel, still is grown as a biofuel. Basically all the hedgerows removed, a few trees here and there sort of, being pretty, but essentially as a birder, I would feel all I'm seeing is some crows, maybe a couple of little tits in the trees. It was so striking when I drove across the Oder River for the first time. There's this kind of rickety old iron bridge that connects east of Berlin into Poland. And literally halfway across the bridge, suddenly I was surrounded by birds. Why? Because on the other side, old-fashioned agriculture is still occurring. In a Warta River mouth, Warta Delta National Park there. I can't really pronounce it, so Warta is what it looks like to me. They let it flood. Naturally, there are no flood control projects, but they're doing row crops, they're doing cattle, sheep, full-scale farming, but within a more organic context. Because it's a national park, because they're required to. They can't come in and clear everything out. They can't use pesticides. They can't use mechanized equipment. And it's an extraordinarily biodiverse place, not just the bird life, but the insect life. It was like you were walking into almost the effect coming from the sterile Western European approach to agriculture. It was like you were walking into the tropics. It was that spectacularly rich and dense. And the same thing actually you will find on a smaller scale locally here. If you go down to Watsonville and you see a plastic wrapped field stretching out a quarter mile, again, no hedgerows, very little vegetation that isn't part of the farming enterprise, you'll see some starlings. You might see a few blackbirds, a couple of crows, nothing. You go down to the homeless garden, and we had a little contest for the early arrivals in the chat room, in the meeting room here, and asked to guess how many species of bird have been seen at the homeless garden farm. It's not a big farm. And it doesn't have a water feature, which would often attract extra species. More than 150 bird species have been observed there. And typically on just an ordinary day, you go down there, you see 40 or 50 kinds of birds. Why? Because agriculture is being done right. There are many reasons for the decline of bird populations in the Western Hemisphere, in our country. We've lost, by latest good scientific estimate, more than 30% of all our individual birds that you might expect in a given year in the past 50 years. So we've lost a third of our birds just in 50 years, and we're continuing to lose them. Some of that decline has to do with direct mortality. There, the two leading killers of our birds are, number one, outdoor cats, somewhere between 1.5 billion and more than 3 billion birds per year killed in the United States by outdoor cats. And number two, not such a distant second, is collision with buildings. However, the leading cause for the decline in bird population, and the number 4 cause, which is a little harder to prove, but it's strongly suspected. Number 1, habitat loss. Number 4, pesticides. So we have some work to do when it comes to controlling outdoor cat populations. We have some work to do when it comes to building smarter houses that are less likely to cause collisions. But much of the future of birds is in the hands of how we are managing our land. And much of this country is farmland. So if when you create a farm, you're not simply taking habitat off the table, but you're also creating new habitat or preserving existing habitat, you are helping the natural world, of which birds are the most visible representatives, but by no means the only members. And if the farming is done in a less chemical intensive way, essentially organic farming, which is what the Homeless Garden Project is all about in terms of their farming methods, you're not poisoning things. You're not poisoning the insects. You're not poisoning the birds that eat the insects. You're allowing some kind of wild cycle to occur in a farm that is nonetheless valuable, employing people, producing produce, producing food for all of us. So I have so many reasons why I admire the Homeless Garden Project. Just at the social level, at the personal level, at the community level, it is truly one of the great organizations I've ever encountered. And Derry is on my short list of people in the world I most admire. She's just amazing. But there is this additional element, which is that they are kind of a flagship here right in the city for a different approach to how we coexist in the world with other species. So what we do with our farms going forward is hugely important for the natural world, and particularly for my beloved birds, but not only for that. So that's the short pitch for what farms can do to birds. Farms are really very friendly to birds. And Joanne is going to tell us the other side of the story, and I'm very happy to hand it over to you. Joanne.
Thank you. That was great, Jonathan. Yeah, well, I'm going to start by sharing my screen and showing you our Songbird Farm Trail, which is new. If you've ever experienced watching a parent bird feeding its young like this Western bluebird, you know how delightful it is. It reconfirms the power of nature, lets us get outside ourselves. It's an antidote to feeling everything that is spiraling out of order, and it gives us a glimpse into the wonders of a functioning ecosystem. Without birds, our crops and wildlands would suffer immensely, and so would our psyche. I feel honored to be able to see such an intimate act that these birds undertake every 10 minutes or so all day long for a couple of weeks as they feed the voracious young. So our Songbird Farm Trail is new. We've created it to outline the important role that beneficial birds can play on farms, helping with pest control, and the critical role that farmers play in protecting declining bird populations that Jonathan was talking about. We're mapping farms with nest boxes and encouraging others to join. The blue dots on the farm are the farms, and we can click on them and actually learn about the farmers. Like this is Javier Zamora at JSM Organics in Watsonville. The yellow part is where agriculture is in this along the coast in central California. And all of where the yellow is are potential places where birds or in bird boxes could be placed. This last year, we put up 100 boxes, or a little more than 100, and we checked more or monitored them. And what we found was about 2/3 of the boxes were occupied, and a little over half were occupied by western bluebirds. A lot of the rest were tree swallows, but other swallows like barn swallows and violet greens, and also we had a chestnut-backed chickadee family. So why build a songbird farm trail? Well, Jonathan was talking about how there's a decline in birds, and it is really significant. Over the last 50 years, we've lost about 3 billion birds, and agriculture needs to help support birds. As climate is changing, birds are going to be looking for habitat as their ranges change. And the more we can help them with boxes and with vegetative habitat, the better. This beautiful farm is right here in our area. Blue Heron Farm is in Corralitos, and they have 32 nest boxes that they had already put up. So that was some of the boxes that we were monitoring. And when farmers bring birds closer to their farm, they are getting better pest control. So nest boxes are providing cavities for these cavity nesting birds that are looking for cavities. The wildlands don't have them as much anymore. We've cut down so many of the trees, and now with wildfires, it's even worse. So providing these cavities really is important. And we have this wild vision of 1 million nest boxes from Baja to BC in the agricultural lands. And really, it's not that wild, because it would only mean 5% of the about 22 million acres of cropland would host a box. We'd also like to see boxes on other parts of flyways in North America. So what people can do, if you're a farmer, put up some boxes, or if you have boxes, let us know and get on the map. You can buy boxes from us or find out other places to purchase boxes. And you can sponsor a box if you're not a farmer. You can also learn more. And that's what these other tabs are here. I'm gonna go over to the introduction. Just to show you that there's a lot of information here, and I'm not going to go into that so much. What I'm going to do now is go start this slideshow, which this is one of the birds. This was the chickadee at the nest box, the one nest box we had with them. And we were waiting around wondering if that box was occupied, and waiting and waiting. And finally we thought, oh, well, we're just gonna check. We opened the box, and there are 7 chestnut-backed chickadees inside the box. And then we see this parent and we're like, oh, no wonder it takes a while to catch all those insects. So, and what a tribe it had to feed. So I'm going to talk a little more about Songbird Farm Trail. I'm also going to talk about pest control services of birds. I'm going to discuss which birds are insectivores, which are carnivores or omnivores. I'm going to go into habitat, water, and safety needs, talk about designing a farm based on birds' foraging strategies, some other tools for success, and what a bird-friendly farm looks like. So I talked about these birds, and you can see in their natural situations, they would be using trees for cavities. Cavity nesters are often insectivores, and that's a group of birds that are really in steep decline. So the more we can help them, the better. Here are some of the delightful shots that I took, and the top you can see are the bluebirds, and then below are the tree swallows. The tree swallows put feathers around their nest, which is interesting. And I've been a birder for 40 years, and I knew this project would be fun, but I didn't know how enchanting it would be. Let's see. So there's other birds that also use these boxes. I talked about the chickadees, violet green swallows. We also had house wren put sticks in the box. They often will create mini nests and then only use one. So that's what that was about. But these other birds, Buick's wrens, white-breasted nuthatches, ash-throated flycatchers, and oak titmouse will all use the same box. It's a box that has 1 9/16 of an inch hole with a metal hole guard around it. So squirrels and woodpeckers cannot increase its size, because if it increases, the squirrels might move in, rats might move in, and starlings might move in, and we don't want any of those. Last year, we published this booklet, Supporting Beneficial Birds and Managing Pest Birds. You can download it for free at wildfarmalliance.org and go to our resource pages. I co-wrote this with Dr. Sarah Cross and Dr. Sasha Heath, and a few of the slides you'll see next are from them, including this one. This one is from Sarah Cross, and it shows how research has been happening all around the world on avian pest control. And there's this really cool resurgence going on, because in the past, very distant past, in the 1880s and forward to the 1920s, there was research looking into how important birds were. And then the the DDT happened, and everybody forgot about natural systems until more recently. So that's why you're hearing about this. It's exciting to know there's so much going on. And I'm skipping to the appendix because this shows how there's 120 studies have been we compiled, the best studies about pest control of birds on farms or by birds. And so it's looking at how birds are eating insects in fruit and veggie crops and field crops and nut crops, grasslands and pastures, and how raptors are eating pest birds and rodents. And of the 120 studies, 90% showed that there was benefits from the birds. There was only 3% that showed the opposite. So nothing's black and white, but we are getting a really clear sense that birds are helpful. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to go into the case studies more. This is Julie Jedlicka, who studied putting bluebird boxes in vineyards up in Napa and Sonoma, or I think mostly Napa. And she found that when you put boxes up, there was a 10-fold increase of bluebirds. She put out some sentinel insects into the field at different spaces and found that the bluebirds ate 2.5 times more of those insects when there was nest boxes around. Then she looked at the scat of the birds to see really what they were eating, and she found that a lot of the birds were eating this sage leafhopper, which in itself is not a pest, but it is closely related to a really significant pest, which in the year she was studying, she knew that it was really low for whatever reason it was low, but she tracked that it was low and surmised that on a year when blue-green sharpshooters, this pest had in higher populations, that they would be eating them, and that pest causes vines to die. So up in that area, there's a lot of growers putting up bluebird boxes, and now some of those boxes that we have put up in our region are on vineyards. Remember, I talked about tree swallows using a lot of the boxes. Well, we don't have research documenting pest control benefits, although we do have farmers saying they recognize that they're helpful. But this study was where barn owls, which are related, barn swallows, were nesting near this oilseed rape crop, and their feces contain 18% of the pests of that crop. And they don't build, or they're not cavity nesters, they build mud nests on ledges, like you can see here. I did my master's research looking at birds eating codling moth in apple orchards, and this is a chickadee with a cavity nest right in the apple tree. And there's been research like this in different parts of the world because apples are grown everywhere, and the research shows between 13 and 99% of the overwintering codling moth is eaten by birds. The flicker is a cavity nester, but it's too big to fit into our boxes. The woodpeckers on the right, they create their own cavities. They don't use nest boxes. But the white-breasted nuthead, if you'll remember, is one of the birds that would use our boxes. What I find really cool is that the overwhelming majority of songbirds are beneficial during nesting season when they're feeding insects to their young. So even birds that aren't insectivores year-round are still important, like this red-winged blackbird with its beak full of insects. And what we are encouraging is coexistence, where farmers support those birds when they're good, and later, if they are bad, then discourage them during that short period of time, but most of the year, they are good. So we encourage encourage farmers to encourage these birds year-round, the insectivores and carnivores, and I know you couldn't see that, so blowing it up, some of the insectivores are the ash-throated flycatcher, like I mentioned, and also cliff swallows that'll build nests under eaves. Other insectivores, though, need to build woven nests in habitat, so they need habitat to support that. Carnivores, like great blue herons, will eat rodents in farms, and farmers can put up platforms for them. Lots of farmers are already putting up barn owl boxes for these owls, but there's other kinds of carnivores that need woven or build woven nests in trees and need that habitat. So here's a list of omnivores and granivores, and it's everything from the quail family to starlings and sparrows and blackbirds and finches. And these are the species that we are recommending coexistence. A study that was done here is just winding down now, here in our area on strawberries, where the researchers looked at over 20 organic strawberry farms. Some of them were monocultures, and some of them were diversified farms that grew lots of stuff, including strawberries. And they found something really interesting, which was that when you have a diversified farm, there's a lot of food there for the birds. There's there's different insects, and there's different resources, right? There's different kinds of cover and places to nest, and but mostly as it relates to food and strawberries, they don't have to eat just strawberries. And whereas in the monocultures, even some of our birds who we think of as insectivores year round, like these top two birds, which are kinds of flycatchers, they sometimes were found with strawberries on their beaks. So, and they cause a lot more damage. So if there's nothing there for them to eat, then we have created this situation where they, what else are they going to do? This is a study in walnuts looking at calling moth again and how these birds are eating them. This was Sasha Heath, one of our co-authors, did this work and found that 35% of the calling moth overwintering calling moth were eaten by birds. What is really another thing that she looked at, which I find so interesting, is she looked at the wider landscape, and she found that there is this sweet spot with farms, and she's now studying it with gardens, where if a farm or garden is located within a really industrial monoculture, or say a garden in a really urbanized area, there's just not a whole lot for them to eat. And so birds that come to live there may not do so well and may not really want to live there. They might visit but not stay, or not want to nest or provide pest control services. And on the other end of the spectrum, really, really wild places where there's a little farm or garden, birds may not want to leave that wild habitat. It may be the best, and the farm doesn't support much. There might be some pest control benefit from them, but it's the places like the homeless garden, where there is, it's not in a really wild area, but it's certainly not in a monoculture. And when you look at the wider landscape, nearby there's Aunt Nellie's Pond, and then there's the riparian habitat feeding into that. And all of that, I think, draws the birds in, but so does the farm. And it makes for good pest control and good place for birds to be. So another study, which was really cool, this is cherry growers often do not like birds, and but these growers in Michigan love American kestrels, because the kestrels, while they mostly eat rodents, they scare the heck out of pest birds, and so they're saving millions of dollars for growers. I mentioned barn owl boxes are going up or have been going up on farms for a long time, and at Humboldt State, they've been studying them and finding that it really depends on what kind of habitat is around as to whether you're going to have good occupancy, because the birds will spend a third of their time in a vineyard. This was studies were done up in Napa Sonoma area. They'll spend a third of their time in grasslands and most of the rest of the time in other natural habitat. So if a farm is in a really industrial situation, it's not, and the bird has a choice, it's going to try and find a nest box that is more like this scenario, where they can have hunt both on the farm and elsewhere in nature. So besides nesting habitat, birds need vegetative habitat, like I've been talking about. They need water sources, and they need safe places to be on the farm. So hedgerows are a great way to add diversity to a farm, and there's been a study showing how these birds have helped to reduce kale insect pests by 24%, or insects that were put out, experimental insects that were put out in kale, but pest insects. In this situation, birds reduced insect pests in alfalfa by over 33%, and that on average, and that happened a lot more when there was at least 2 trees in the field, because there's more birds, as opposed to if there's just weedy edges, then it's not so good. Doug Tallamy and his seminal book, Bringing Nature Home, which I highly recommend, and his new book, which you can look up the name. Anyways, he talks all about, he's an entomologist who has really shown us how important plants are, especially native plants are, to supporting caterpillars. Because if you think about, if you want to stuff some insect food down your young bird's mouth, are you going to take a soft caterpillar or a hard beetle? It's just caterpillars work well and they're big protein sources. And in any case, what Doug found was that species or genuses like oaks and willows and cherries really support lots of caterpillars. And one of his grad students has shown that the green bars are caterpillars, that 16 out of 20 bird families use or feed caterpillars a lot to their young. So water, water birds need for drinking. They need to keep their feathers clean. Some birds like swallows are building nests, and I know a farmer who makes a mud puddle every spring for his swallows. But farmers can leave a little drip happening. If they have springs or seeps, they can put in ponds. And yeah, Jonathan had mentioned how important water is. It really is to birds, really draws them in. We want farms to be safe, and there's lots of pesticides that are problems, but a few that are really a problem. Neonicotinoids are, we've learned that they are causing birds not to be able to migrate correctly. And then another really big issue for birds is rodenticides, especially the 2nd generation rodenticides, because what happens is the rodents keep eating and eating and eating this pesticide, this rodenticide before they die. And then when a raptor comes and eats them, the rodents have this really high level of toxicity. Not good. And you can just trap them. Jonathan also mentioned cats. I agree, cats are really a problem. They kill so many birds. And so if you have nest boxes, you must put, and cats, you must put predator guards on those nest boxes. But even still, it's problematic because once the nestlings fledged for the first week or two, they're not good at getting away from predators. And cats, you know, cats, they love to hunt. And the thing is, I love cats. You can see my cat, our cat Stella, is meowing at a bird right there. This is our catio on the left, and it works great. It keeps the cats in. We have native plants in there and some other plants, and then that's just the side garden. The back garden is for the birds, and these are some of the birds we've seen in our garden, many, many more. And what else is cool about this catio is that it sets up a perfect avian pest control experiment for you, because you exclude birds, and so they can't get in and eat the caterpillars. And twice in 2 different years on different plant species, some moths got in, had laid eggs. The caterpillars came out and completely denuded the plants in the catio. And outside we had the same plant species. They were totally fine. So, and that's the kind of research that you know, these researchers, these avian ecologists are conducting. Well, it depends on the bird as to what it's going to eat, and it depends on a lot of things on you know, where it hangs out and how it, and when it's going to be on a farm is how it's going to help. So their beaks really make a difference if they're a seed eater or insect eater. different kinds of beaks. And also some birds are in the lower canopies, some are middle canopies, some are way up at the top. Some birds are residents, others are migratory. They might be just here in the winter, or they might just be here in the summer. Designing a farm for birds can be fun. I've been on farms that have all of these birds that are eating aerial prey and or ground prey, and that are eating tree prey. So the aerial insect prey, these are the swallows and flycatchers. The pest birds, it's the falcons, it's the kestrels, Cooper's hawks are eating them. The rodent falcons also, remember I said, would eat rodents, as do these hawks, or the eagle and owl. Bluebirds are down in the low growing areas and on the ground. That's why they're good in vineyards. And juncos are out down on the ground. In orchards, we have warblers and chickadees, lots of birds. Depending on what they are, they might be gleaning this calling moth on the left from the bark, or they might be gleaning little insects and eggs from the leaves. And here's some other birds that are bark gleaners. So if you want to attract birds, first you have to know, well, what kind of birds are already there? And a really great resource, if you're a new birder, is to download Merlin's Bird ID app, which helps you figure out what size the bird is, what color it is, and other attributes. And this is a Cornell app. Cornell has a bunch of great resources. I'm going to talk about all about birds. You can listen to birds. When you start to learn more and more about birds, you realize you need to know what they're singing sometimes in order, or what their song sounds like in order to figure out who they are. So this is a great resource. And we talked about eBird early on. eBird is a citizen science website where people upload what they have seen. But for us, if you wanted to put up a nest box and say you weren't really sure, are bluebirds in my area, you could go to their species map and then type in Western bluebirds, and this shows the blue is where people have seen the Western bluebirds, and the red means that they've seen a lot of them. And so yeah, if I put up a box, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get a bluebird, depending though on if it's too industrial or too urban. Cornell also has Nest Watch, which gives nest box plans and teaches you about how we don't want to encourage non-native species like this house sparrow or starlings. They have also great information about discouraging predators. So what I covered was nest boxes. Oh, I didn't cover perches, but farmers are also putting up perches. I covered how there are barn swallows on ledges, how native habitat and water resources are good, and how we have to take care when cats and other predators are there, and or if there are pesticides being used. I'm going to talk about the 4 elements of what a good farm looks like. The soil is covered. This is number 1. With crops or cover crops or native or non-native. If it's non-native, it's okay, just so it's non-invasive. Just keeping that ground covered, and it's going to support some of those species that hang out in the ground and low shrub foraging birds. The second element is including flowers to support beneficial insects like this lacewing on the left, and to provide floral resources for hummingbirds that need nectar, but lots of birds use other kinds of the floral resources like petals and catkins. And this is a picture of the homeless garden, which is doing that. Shrubs and trees are there providing structure, food, nesting, and cover for birds. And this is JSM Organics again, south of Watsonville. And yeah, that structure is so important for some species. And then, you know, we're looking at what a farm looks like. We should see some evidence of wildlife, which I had fun playing around with here. So in any case, I want to wrap it up and just say, besides the Songbird Farm Trail, which we went to over on this tab on the right, the middle tab, you can go to Farmer Success Stories. And we are putting up 4-minute videos about once a month and have several up. And we're going to be releasing another one in a week or so. And they're videos with farmers talking about how and why they're supporting birds, and researchers describing some of the research that we have documented. So you can get to this by going to bit.ly/beneficial-birds, or just go to our website and you'll be directed there. So I want to thank our funders, especially Department of Pesticide Regulation, but these other foundations. And here's my contact information. Thank you.
Well, great. So I think our plan now is to take some questions, and Claude and Paul are going to email me questions. I know there's a few questions in the chat. Hoping that they're going to help me out. By Larry Jacobs says, "Good job, Joanne."
Thanks, Larry.
Boy, do I agree, Joanne. You're also moving up the hero list for me, and that was a really interesting presentation. And I just, you know, there were like 5 different moments, but I just went, "Oh, that is so great! That is so great!" And cool science, but also your lifelong dedication to this, and the farmers who are into it. It's just all great.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot. Yeah. Well, and you can tell I love it. So that, you know, I think it's part of the secret of life is finding something you love to do.
So I have a couple questions that I caught through the chat, but I'm still hoping that Claude and Paul will send them to me. But one of my questions was, I saw really quickly go by a resource for how to build a nest box. Where is that?
Yeah, you can go to nestwatch.org, and it's a Cornell website where they have lots of great information more. I mean, you really, if you're going to get into building nest boxes, you should plan on spending a couple of hours on that website, because it's dense with so much information. It'll answer a lot of questions that will come up later. If you don't, you'll just have to go back and read it.
Okay. So here's another question. Would you advocate for attracting birds to integrated strips of prairie in row crop farming? People like Matt Liebman at Iowa State are working on this. Is there a way to connect scientists at Point Blue Conservation Science with this work?
Well, I do know about prairie strips, and I haven't heard so much about how they are putting them in for birds. I had been aware of their benefits to pollinators, to monarchs, and to beneficial insects, but it makes sense that birds, of course, would use them. So yes, the more you can integrate habitat into the farm, the better. There is, I didn't cover this, but there's another really cool research that a researcher in the Illinois area that looked at corn and soybeans and prairie on the edges of them. And the birds coming into those crops, were they beneficial or not? And she found that the birds were really beneficial for the soybeans, but not so much for the corn. So, it just depends on the situation. But yeah, I think that, those two systems should definitely be looked at together. And then somebody mentioned Point Blue Conservation Science. They're a wonderful resource. I definitely recommend checking out their website. And what they do is they have a bunch of staff people that work with the USDA, NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, to help ranchers, not so much farmers that are growing crops, but ranchers, to help them support birds and look at climate change issues with the ranchers.
I think we have someone on the call today who is from Point Blue.
Oh, good.
And I think I could be wrong, but I thought that was what the question was about, was how could they, maybe not. Okay, here's another one. Would you advocate the work of organizations like the Savannah Institute, which promotes tree crops integrated with other systems that include row crops and animals, even if it's not organic?
Oh, even if it's, well, I have talked with the Savannah Institute. I think they're an incredible organization. And, there's a whole spectrum of pest management. And so my husband and I used to be organic farmers, but just because you're not organic, you might actually be doing a lot more than an organic farmer does for nature. So it really, I don't know if that is such a perfect lens to look through. The more important things are you're not using the really toxic pesticides, and you're providing habitat, you're providing safe places for the birds.
Yeah, I mean, I'll put in from the conservation side, if you put some fertilizer, some, manufactured fertilizer on your farm, that is typically, might in the larger scheme, if overused, it can have environmental impacts, but that's not hurting the birds. And there are probably some pesticides, certain herbicides, some of the milder insecticides that are not that harmful. The neonics are just ghastly. They should have been banned in this country decades ago. We were moving in that direction until the Trump administration came in, and the new EPA reversed that just by fiat, flying in the face of evidence that it's also the neonics are harmful to human beings. So it seems to me that you don't have to be strict and purist about it. If you have a farm that has some structure, some variety, and doesn't do terrible things, birds are fairly tough. They'll make use of it and they'll appreciate it.
So there is someone on the call from Point Blue. It's someone from their board. And she says, is there a way we can connect our scientists with your great work? We have 160 scientists on staff, including many avian specialists working from the Sierra to the sea.
Yeah, thank you. I actually am working with one of your scientists right now, Wendell Gilgert. I know he's getting close to retirement, but we have a project creating a habitat assessment form for beneficial birds, and he's incredible with his help on this project. So, but I'd love to work more.
Joanne's email address is there too.
Yeah.
Still looking at us, so.
Oh, yeah. Could change that to something else, I guess. Sorry.
No, it's good.
So we have about 4 more minutes, and I have more questions than I can get to, but here's a question. We support lots of birds on our organic seed farm, but also suffer severe crop loss from house finches. We used nets, but what kind of predator nest boxes would you recommend for controlling finches?
Well, It depends on when the seed is ready. American kestrels, they're going to be nesting in late spring, summer, and they would definitely scare away the finches if that seed is going to be ready around the time that the kestrels are there. That's good. I mean, you could still encourage kestrels, and maybe they would just live in that region and come by your farm.
But it's a fair question. I mean, there are birds that are doing significant damage, and it seems like we shouldn't just present the happy story here. I mean, that's a real issue, and I'd be curious to hear you say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, yeah, in our bird booklet, we cover both supporting beneficial birds and managing pest birds. And we talk about how you can use sound and scaring visual tactics. They're tricky though, because sometimes if you use, say, like a sound gun that is really loud and it scares the birds away, sometimes they remember that, oh, that's where the food is, and it's like dinner bell. The best thing to do, like in a really high value crop, we'll see wine grape growers are netting their crop, but seed crop, well, it may be high value too, and you could net it. That's a for sure thing. There is some really new research looking at drones. I don't think there's anything that's come out of it yet, but I predict that there will be something at some point where drones may be, erratic enough to not be predictable, as opposed to like when people put up that tape, that metallic tape that shimmers in the wind. The birds get used to it, or they get used to scarecrows. So there's also some research looking into using lasers, but currently I am really skeptical about that, because the same time, and it's very expensive, it's only really high-end farms that are buying these lasers, and they'll say that the lasers really discourage birds, but don't walk near these lasers. Don't put your sheep or other animals out there, because it'll harm your eyes. And so it may also harm birds' eyes. So yeah.
I mean, is it the case that there will be crops that are just difficult to reconcile with having a lot of birds around?
I think so, but it depends too, because it may be it depends on the kind of birds, because for instance, Sarah Cross did some research looking at sunflowers, which is a seed crop. And she was looking at, are the birds, are they helping with pest control? Well, they weren't. But what she found that really, really interesting was she looked at the hedgerows and habitat on the edges of these farms, and found that the habitat was not bringing in these birds, that they were everywhere. It didn't matter on farms that didn't have the habitat, they were still there, and most of the pest problems were coming from insects anyways. There was hardly any bird damage. But what happens is when there's a huge bird damage, it's usually these big flocks, like finches, like starlings, and they key into they dissuade predators by being in a flock, and as opposed to hiding in habitat. So there's all these different factors. I don't think there's a magic potion or bullet for dealing with pest birds. And yes, Jonathan, I think there are problems with birds, and I don't think we have all of the answers yet.
Yeah, it is notable that many of the problem species were either, as in the case of the starling, they're not even native to North America. That was an introduced species that has, for the last century, been an enormous problem. And the house finch was actually not a particularly widespread bird, but it, because of human disturbance and human development of the land, has become just like omnipresent in all 48, in all the lower 48 states bird. So we bear some responsibility for for many of the particularly problematic birds. It's not like there were, you know, huge flocks that were coming in and doing this to crops 100 years ago. This is actually, a lot of these are fairly new phenomena that we are responsible for.
Good point.
Should we take one more question? We don't want to try people's patience, but it's
Yes.
so nice to talk to the two of you.
Yeah, so it's hard to choose one more, but I will do that. And I will also ask Joanne to provide your email address. So if people want to email, is that okay, Joanne? Can people?
Yeah. I'll put it back up.
Okay. So does raising earthworms help bring birds to a garden?
I don't know. I would think that robins, if they had access to those earthworms, they would be eating them. That's for sure. Jonathan, do you know?
Yeah, my understanding is that earthworms are somewhat problematic. I can't remember. I don't have the details at hand. Problematic just in terms of ecologically, because weren't they? Are they not an introduced species themselves? Yes.
Yeah, they're not native.
And the reason you can't walk 50 feet in this country without encountering a robin, at least at one time of year or the other, is that there are a whole lot of earthworms, because the earthworms are really, really common. But so why you would want to attract robins to your farm, why you would put in earthworms to bring robins to your farm, given that robins basically their stock and trade is eating earthworms. I mean, it's nice. You could also have a goldfish pond. I don't know. It doesn't strike me as, from a conservation perspective, that doesn't seem significant.
Yeah, I would rather see, and if you're thinking about invertebrates, to support the bees and the bird, or bees and beneficial insects, that then also, you know, they need that floral resources, which then also support birds.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there. There are more questions. I do hope people will email Joanne with your questions.
Yeah, please do.
And on behalf of Homeless Garden Project, I want to really thank everyone for joining in, and thank Jonathan and Joanne. A super interesting presentation. And then I also want to let you both say your goodbyes.
Yeah.
I just say it again. Love the project, and I love, the more I hear about it, the more I love what Joanne is doing too. So I'm honored to be here and grateful.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, Dari, for doing what you do for the homeless. And thank you, Jonathan, for helping inform us on conservation.
All right.
And thanks to everyone who came. We know you have many entertainment options, so thank you for that.
Yeah. All right. Take care. We hope to see you again.